Does anyone ever heard the term Archaeology? Yeah, that's basically we are reading the text that archaeologists are digging up. So archaeologists are going into the Middle East and they're digging up artifacts and texts, and archaeologists, we read the text. So my specialty is texts from Assyria and Babylonia and Akkadian, Sumerian and all of that. And we'll have a few examples of that as well. And before we start, so shall we just have a short word of prayer? Dear Father in heaven, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to take a few minutes to talk about extra biblical evidences for the Bible, the stories, the events, the people, the places mentioned there. And we thank you that as believers we can also truly say that we do not have to neglect our intelligence, that we can have a reasonable faith, even if we cannot explain everything, and even if there are gaps in our knowledge and things we cannot fully harmonize at this point. We thank you that we can have faith in you. And we ask that you will now be with us in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, the first thing I want to emphasize, what we do today is absolutely not important to salvation. Okay? If you do not understand this or you forget it, it will not be the reason why you should be lost. Okay? Remember the Waldensians and the Hussites we've heard about yesterday evening, they knew nothing about this. So I like to refer to archaeology and Egyptology and all of that as kind of an add-on, right? So I am not a biologist. I do not know much about biology and chemistry. So I just believe Genesis 1 as it reads. But I'm always happy if someone has studied biology and has studied chemistry and can give all these reasons why evolution doesn't really work, right? So I'm happy for that. But even if I don't know about all these technical knowledge, I can still believe Genesis 1 and 2. In the same way, I believe the health message. And I'm happy for everyone who is a doctor and who can show why pork is actually very dangerous to your body, right? But even if I don't know that, I can still refrain from pork, just the Bible says. So this is just to say what we see here is kind of an add-on. I believe you can still believe the Bible's stories just at their face value without knowing any Aramaic or Akkadian or having done some studies in archaeology. So I would like to start with this quotation. In Bogenhofen, I start every course with this quotation. As a preparation for Christian work, many think it essential to acquire an extensive knowledge of historical and theological writings. They suppose that this knowledge will be an aid to them in teaching the gospel, but their laborious study of the opinions of men tend to the enfeebling of their ministry rather than to its strengthening. As I see libraries filled with ponderous volumes of historical and theological lore, I think, why spend money for that which is not bread? The 6th chapter of John tells us more than can be found in such works. Broken down, if you understand John 6, you're just fine, okay? If you have your morning devotion and you follow Jesus and you've never heard about Enuma Elish or about some interesting loan words of Egyptian in the Old Testament or some Ugaritic myth which is closely related to the Bible, you're fine. So what we do is a nice add-on because I believe God not only gives us the necessary things, but also things that are interesting. You know, the Christian walk is not just the most minimum we need, but it's many things. God is blessing us with many insights that are of additional value. Okay, with that said, fasten your seatbelt, and I'm going as quick as I can. I divided this into people and then places, events and text. So I want in each category just to give a few examples, and I will not give any long introduction into the theory of all of that because then we would never get to anything. But if you have questions later on, you can always ask me to any epoch we are doing here. So we start with something very simple. People of the Bible. Can anyone who has some archaeological leanings, can anyone read to me what he is reading on this wonderful stone? Can anyone read that? whether it's, you know, there or there. Is there anything you can make out of it? It's a stone found some decades ago. Okay. Yes! Did you see here? It says Pilatus. What language is that? Does anyone know? That is Latin, and in English it is, of course, Pilate. Can you guess? Like, you know, like as a historian and an archaeologist, you always find things broken and, you know, it's almost never complete. So can you guess what stood here? Pontius Pilatus. Very, very good. So this is the Latin text as it is reconstructed by archaeologist Augustus Tiberium. Pontius Pilatus, and then this is Praefectus Judae. Yeah? You can see it right here. Judae, which is the prefect of Judah. Okay, that was very easy because the script is what we call, what is the script called? It's Latin script, right? It's the script we use for English and German today. So this script now will maybe be a little bit more difficult. This is a rock inscription from Wadi Brisa, and it's in Akkadian. Has anyone ever looked into cuneiform? A little bit, okay, we'll talk later. So I'm just reading it to you. This is a sign saying that what follows is a god's name. So it's Nabi which is a very archaic writing for Nabu, one of the major gods of the Neo-Babylonian pantheon. It says Nabi Kuduri, and then it says Utsur. So this is Nabu Kuduri Utsur. Has anyone of you heard the name Nabu Kuduri Utsur? This is Nebuchadnezzar II, the famous king of Babylon. You know from the book of Daniel and Jeremiah and some other books, and he's writing a big inscription here on this rock face high up so that you can actually don't even read it. It's there for the gods to read. And here we have a brick. When I started Archaeology and I started to read my first text, you know, normally if you read text, you're like reading a book, right? Or maybe you're reading a scroll. So in my classes, we started reading bricks. So the first assignment was at homework, please read this brick. And so this is a brick. Of course, this is just, you know, like a redrawing. And here we have the same name. And as you may see, if you compare the signs with the first one, you see it's very different because Nebuchadnezzar, he was such a conservative guy that on these bricks and many other inscriptions, he used sign forms. So he used these signs often, which were more than 1,000 years old already. So that if people later would look at that and would say, oh, this is very old, right? So people, like Babylonians, also the Egyptians were very conservative. The more old it looked like, the better it was. So most likely almost nobody, even in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, who could read cuneiform, could read that because it was very, very old. So that's Nebuchadnezzar. I thought maybe we can just learn a few signs of cuneiform, right? So this is the famous Kuruk monolith by Shalmaneser III, and this is, if you like study this is how you read it, right? So no panic, we're not reading all of it. But I'm giving you an example line here. And if you just follow with me here, you see my, yes, you see, right?
Is it from left to right or right to left?
Very good question. Hebrew is from right to left. And Akkadian is from left to right. And Egyptian is, Old Egyptian?
Any direction.
It's always the direction where the ducks and the other animals are looking. So you look at the direction and then you start left or right, or sometimes it's going even in that direction. That's true. So you see here, the first sign, how many, we call them Winkelhaken, how many of these little ones can you see? 1, 2, 7, okay, and this is a sign for? 7, yes, you read your first cuneiform sign, that's 7. And so the next one, oh sorry. That's its sign is called it means 100. So 700. So the next sign, it says this is Gish, Gish, and it means that the next word will be something made out of wood. And so the next word here, this is Gigir, which is Sumerian, and it means chariot. So a chariot made out of wood, and then you have this sign, it's very easy to remember one single one and then these 3 or 4 Winkelhaken, and it means many of it, like plural. So we have 700 chariots, and then we have some cavalry and so on and so forth. And then we have 10, you see that one? That is 10,000, and then the sign means troops, like soldiers. And again, a sign for many, so 10,000 soldiers, and then Shah means of, like 10,000 soldiers of a certain guy, and his name is then written in syllabic writing, Ilchuleni from Hamat. So in this battle, there's someone else fighting against the Assyrians, and now we're trying to read that. Can anyone guess what this could mean? 2, very good. You're already almost an archaeologist. Anyone remember what this means? Very good. That is 2,000. And this, what's the sign for? There was a wooden element, yes. And this is, of course, Gigir. That's the chariots. 2,000 chariots. And this again was 10. Very good. And that was 1,000 again. 10,000. And then we got soldiers. And we got, of course, many of them, right? 10,000 soldiers. And this means of. And now we got to the name, and that is Achabu. Achabu. Anyone can guess what Achabu might be, what that name actually be? What? That is a king called Ahab. Shalmaneser III describes a battle in which Ahab fought in a coalition of many other Aramaic tribes against him. This battle is not even in the Bible. But we know Ahab is a historical figure because of that. And then it's called Sirlaya. These 2 A's at the end, it means like, you know, if you have Hittites, Pharisaites, Amalekites, it's ites, right? You know, it's a Gentile, it's a name of a people. And can you guess what the Assyrians tried to say when they said Sirla? He is from Israel. So they mangled a little bit. You know, they couldn't really speak Israel, so they said Sirlaya, right? And that's where he is from. So another one, very famous, you may have heard about this, found 1991 in Tel Dan, north in Israel. That's why it's called the Tel Dan Stele. And it's very broken, but it's very famous for these 3 signs. It is a D, a W, and a D. So in this case, it would even doesn't matter which way you read, but you read from here. So it's Beit and then D, W, D. Anyone could guess what D, W, D could mean? This is, of course, David. Beit David, the house of David, the first clear evidence for the existence of a dynasty going back to King David. Now, this is not Q&A form. Does anyone know what kind of script that is? This is actually Hebrew script, Hebrew Aramaic. Like every Hebrew writer in the Bible in the latter period would write this. So the Hebrew we have today, like, you know, that's Aramaic of a much later age. So this is how Isaiah or Jeremiah would actually write. And of course, it's from right to left. That's the famous Tel Dan Stele, evidence for the king David, at least for his dynasty. And that's just another interesting line from that same stele. It says, and my father laid down, he went to wherever. The king of Israel came into the land of my father. And then it says, and this, of course, you know, it's always the case when it's really interesting, it's broken off. And it's just, you know, half of it preserved. So if something like Ram, son of king of Israel, here of Melech, you know, maybe of Melchizedek, right? Melchizedek, the king of righteousness. Melech is the king. And here of Yisrael, J, a Shin, R, Aleph, and an L, a Lamed, Israel. And then he says, and I killed someone Yahu, son of king of the house of David. So this text is actually not about David. It's about 2 other kings. One out of the house of David, which is, if you remember the kingdoms, there were how many kingdoms in the period of the kings? 2. One is in the north and one is in the south. And the kingdom of David is in the south. And there's one, and the other one is called Israel. So Israel and this the north and the southern kingdom are fighting against someone, and this someone says, I killed one of them, and somehow the other also. Yeah? Does anyone know of a battle where two kings of the north and the south fought someone in the north and one got actually killed?
There was Jehoshaphat and wasn't it Ahaz?
Ahab, yes, that's true. Now, this stele is made by a king called Hazael. You've heard of Hazael? If you read the book of Kings, and this is a story where actually he doesn't, like in the Bible, he doesn't kill this king, he's only wounded. And then Jehu comes and he kills the wounded king. Right? That's the story you can read in the Bible. We don't have time for this. But this is actually a stele from Hazael, who is mentioned in the Bible as well. That's very famous, and you may have heard about this. This is a stone found in Jordan, now in the Louvre. It's called the Mesha stele, or the Moabite stone. Very famous in the 19th century. A Christian traveler found this. I think he was a missionary, and he realized, like, this is very important because people that were living there in Jordan didn't really realize that it's that important. They were hanging their clothes to dry on that stone, right? And he was like, okay, I need to get this stone. And so, like, he made arrangements, and so the natives thought, like, why in the world is he just interested in this, like, stone, right? Maybe that stone is precious. Most likely there must be gold in it, right? And so they heated it and made it cold again and broke it off in order to find the gold, and that's why it's broken. But fortunately, the guy had already made a paper mache impression, so it could be reconstructed. And this is why it's so famous. This is in Moabite. So Moabite is a language that is closely related to Hebrew. It's basically like Austrian to German, so something like this, right? And so if you know Hebrew, you can read this almost without effort. And here you have the famous mention of so in English JSRL, which means Israel, in this Moabite stone. Very famous. The first phrase says, maybe we don't know the vocals, right? You know, in the script in West Semitic, it's always written just the consonants. So we don't really know whether the Moabite said Anaku or Anochi or something, Anacha, something to this effect. But we can actually know what it means, because it's very clear. It is, I am, like originally it's just, Oi, Mesha. So, you know, in Semitic, they don't say I am. They don't say I am Christopher, they say, Oi, Christopher, right? And so they say, I, Mesha, son of someone, king of Moab. Have you ever read about a king of Moab called Mesha in the Bible? Never? It's in 2 Kings 3. So if you're into archaeology, you must love the books of Kings and Chronics, because many of these kings are actually found outside of the Bible. Very famous story. We don't have time for this. But, of course, there's also another king mentioned here, and it's which is Omri. You've heard of Omri? Which is the father of Ahab, one of the worst kings in the history of Israel. And he was the builder of Samaria and all of that. And he is mentioned here as well as the Melech Yisrael, the king of Israel. Maybe they said Maluch, I don't know. Melech, whatever. So, this is Shalmaneser Asharet III. We had already the Kirk monolith from it. This is, at the end of his life, an Assyrian king, the black obelisk, very famous as well, because here you have a lot of pictures, you know. Maybe it's hard to see, so I bring it a little bit closer. This is the picture, and you see, can you guess, who is that? That's the king, right? The Assyrian king. And who might be that? That is someone, you know, paying tribute to the king and saying, you know, like, I will be your servant. Please be nice to me. Let my skin be on my body, right? And so people are bringing something. And so it's like, if you read the text that goes along with this, right? Yeah. you find this. Marat Sha Yauha. And then this Dumu in Akkadian would be Mar Humri. So Humri sounds like what king we just read in Moabite. Omri. But then there's a king Yahweh. Do you remember any king in the Bible that sounds a little bit like Yahweh? Anyone? Joshua, yes, but we could maybe have a somewhere. Right? Jehu, it's the king of Jehu. So what you just look at here, this is the only depiction of a Hebrew king from the ancient Near East. So I don't think like he looked exactly that, right? So you see like all the kings are, they are depicted in the same way. But that's the only picture we have of a Hebrew king. And so this is the tribute. Marat is the tribute of Jehu, the son of Omri. Was Jehu the son of Omri? Yes or no? Bible scholars. Was Jehu the son of Omri? No. Who was the son of Omri? Ahab. Jehu was even from a different dynasty. But the Assyrians, as we say, the kingdom of the south was the house of David. The Assyrians would call Israel the king of the north, not the kingdom of the north. They would call it the house of Omri. So every king that was reigning in the north was then Mar Humri, the son of Humri, another king in the north. Okay, so just very quick, just a few more kings, so you believe me that they're all outside of the Bible. You remember the story of Joash, the little sweet, cute king who became king with 7 years? Something like this, right? And then he repaired the temple. So he is mentioned right here. You see? Here is his name, Joash, in an Assyrian inscription. And then we have here King Menachem. If you never heard of all these names, you seriously must read the Book of Kings, at least once in your life, okay? Most of them are actually bad kings. No surprise. Here's Menachem, the king of Samarina, which is Samaria. And here we have another one. This is Pakadu, Pakacha. And this is Pekach, one of the last kings of the northern kingdom. This is an inscription of Tiglath-Pileser the third, one of the most cruel and fierce Assyrian kings ever. And this is also very nice. There's another inscription, and it's a little bit hard to read, but it's actually starting from here, that you have the name of Ahaz, the king of Judah. Okay, this is a bit more easy to understand. This is a seal impression, actually from King Ahaz. So King Ahaz has, of course, a seal, and we find still impressions, so-called seal bulla, where we find his own seal. So this is for Ahaz, right? And then king of Jotham, the king of Judah. And there are many more of these seal bullas. For example, here we have King Hezekiah, or Hizkiah, right? Also found, and it's kind of sometimes people wonder, like, what is this? So archaeologists are very diverted in their opinion. Is this kind of a pagan influence, whatever? A little bit strange. But and then you have King Esarhaddon, which is another Assyrian king, the one after Sennacherib, and he mentions the guy called Manasseh, king of Judah. You've heard of Manasseh? One of the most worst kings in the Bible. The Assyrians called him Manasseh. So if you read the Akkadian, it's Manasseh there. So, but one of the most interesting things is it's not only the kings that are mentioned, but also we find references to lower rank individuals. And this is really important because, it would not be so difficult to make up stories later about kings, because the names of kings are well remembered. But we find a lot of people mention the Bible that you may have never registered, and we find these names outside of the Bible. For example, Gemariah, the son of Shaphan, that was the one who opened his own chamber for the book of Jeremiah to be read, and we found in Israel, not we, somewhat found, his actual seal for Gemariahu, the son of Shaphan. Here you can read Shaphan, right? and that is his personal seal. And we find Jehoiel, the son of Shelemiah, who was sent by Zedekiah to the prophet Jeremiah, and we find his seal. The very one that went to Jeremiah and on an errand, we find his seal here. Or Gedaliah, the son of Pashur, this is his seal. You can very clearly read Gedaliahu, right? So this is how you would, this is a script that Jeremiah or Isaiah would actually use, right? Gedaliahu, the son of Pashur. But it even gets better because we also have non-royal persons from the Babylonians, for example. So in Jeremiah, when Jerusalem is conquered, we see some of the generals, Nergal-Sarezer and Nebuchadnezzar, the Rabsaris, and Nergal-Sarezer. All of these are generals. These are military terms and their names. And we have an inscription here, a clay tablet, where we have the very same Nabu-Sharusu-Ukin, which is just another spelling for Nebu-Sarsekim, the Rabsaris. Rabsaris means the chief of the eunuchs, so which is actually a military term. It has nothing to do with the eunuchs in the palace. And he is called by the very name here on the tablet. Nabu-Sharusu-Ukin, the chief eunuch, the Rabsharesi. So here we have a document written by or for the very guy who was one of the generals to conquer Jerusalem in 586. And this is very nice. You've heard of Belshazzar-Utsur. Who could be Belshazzar-Utsur? That is Belshazzar. And here you have in one of his inscriptions his very name. So if you ever meet someone who says, was there ever a guy called Belshazzar in the Bible? And you can say, I read the Akkadian. He is mentioned here as the son of Nabonidus. Actually, it's here in Sumerian spelling N Lugal Uru 3, which means Belshazzar Utsur. You know Belshazzar Utsur, Belshazzar was never king of Babylon. You know that? Did you notice when he was actually asking Daniel to read the writing? He said, if you can do this, you will be the number 3 in the empire, because he was only the vice regent. His father Nabonidus was the king, but his father was this is his father Nabonidus, but he stayed for reasons nobody really understands. He just got tired of politics, right? So reigning Babylon was not a joke, you know, of all these priests and people who want you to do all these kind of things. So he took a 10 years leave to live in Arabia. And he took literature with him, and he sat in the oasis there and just enjoyed himself reading old Akkadian literature, and let his son deal with the problems here in Babylon. And so at the end he came back, but that's why the visions of Daniel, the later ones, are dated by Belshazzar and not by the true king Nabonidus. Now this will be interesting for you. This is an inscription found 1825 BC, but 825, sorry, but most likely referring to a text that was older, right? So the script is from the 9th century BC, and it's an interesting mix of Canaanite and Old Aramaic, but now listen to what it says. It says, the misfortunes of the book of Balaam, son of Beor. Have you ever heard about that? You know the guy? A divine seer was he. The gods came to him at night, and he beheld a vision in accordance with El's utterance. Now, who could be El? God. It's even in the Hebrew Bible. It's El, it's El or Elohim, right? They said to Balaam, son of Beor, so will it be done with not surviving? No one has seen the likes of what you've heard. Balaam reports his vision to his intimates. Balaam arose on the morrow. He summoned the heads of the assembly to him, and for 2 days he fasted and wept bitterly. Then his intimates entered into his presence, and they said to Balaam, son of Beor, why do you fast and why do you weep? Then he said to them, be seated, and I will relate to you what the Shaddai gods have planned. Now that's very interesting, because we know from the Bible he was first a true prophet, but then he apostatized. And so, like we see, like even outside the Bible, Balaam is remembered as someone who had visions from the highest God, but also who believed in all the other gods. And did you see how he actually called them? He called them the Shaddai. Have you heard this term Shaddai? Hebrew, El Shaddai, Abraham, right? The Almighty, so the Almighty gods. So that's the story of Balaam. So I think we can, from this, we can truly say there must have been a person called Balaam. Even outside the Bible, he's remembered. For that, we can go over this. Now, this is very interesting. And like almost more than 20 years ago, this shirt was found in Jerusalem. And it was found south of the Temple Mount. And for many years, experts in ancient Hebrew and Aramaic and Canaanite and Phoenician were scratching their heads like, this must not be so difficult. Just a few signs, right? Just a few characters. What does that mean? From the archaeological record, it was clear it was from roughly the 10th century BC. Does anyone know which major king ruled in Jerusalem in the 10th century BC? And that's Solomon, right? Solomon. So 2 years ago, someone with some expert knowledge in a language that is a little bit more outside made a surprising find. Like he looked at this and like, why has never anyone seen this before? He realized this is in Sabbaic script. It's not Hebrew, it's not Aramaic, it is an old South Arabian script, very clearly. So because most people that work in Jerusalem, you know, they know Hebrew and they know Aramaic, but they not necessarily know the language of South Arabia or the script. And so it was then found it actually means something like 5 laudanum. And laudanum is kind of used for incense or a balm, or something, a precious thing. And the script is from Saba, which in English is, I think, is Sheba. Do you know anyone from Sheba that could have links to Solomon? The Queen of Sheba visited. So now I'm not saying like this is from the Queen of Sheba, right? But I'm saying when to this day people have said, like until 2 years ago, it is very unlikely that the Queen of Sheba would take all this long way to tiny Jerusalem. Who can believe that, right? That there would be any connection between Jerusalem and Sheba. And now we know from the time of Solomon, there's actually a shirt in the language of the Sabaeans, which proves there was contact, even with incense and all of that, which the Bible relates. So much to people, we could say much more, but you know, I want to also show you some places. This is Uruk. And Uruk is very famous among archaeologists and archaeologists. It's the modern Warka in southern Iraq, and it's in the Bible it's called Erech. So it's very famous for these little bowls that were used for mass distribution. All the soldiers and slaves and workers got their daily ration. So there's even a sign for daily portion using this bowl. And they had interesting buildings and temples, very costly ones. There was this culture, the Uruk culture, is considered the very first high culture, high civilization of the world. So here and there you find the ruler of Uruk. He is somehow a priest king. Now, this is even prior to the invention of writing. Okay. So he is a priest king somehow. So he's offering to the gods. He's also kind of a king, and he is feeding the animals, giving the impression that the king is like a shepherd. And in the ancient Near East, kings would always say, "I am the good shepherd." So whether it's Hammurabi or whether it's the later kings, would always say, "I am the shepherd that reveres the gods, so and so." And so this idea of a shepherd as a symbol for a king is very, very old. Now, they also had very stunning art, and they were worshipping basically one god at the beginning. And this god is called Anu. Anu is the Sumerian word for heaven. And so the word for heaven also became the word for the God of heaven. And it seems to be that at the very first levels, this first civilization did only worship the God of heaven. And very soon, other gods came, like Inanna and others, who were then added to it. And the interesting phenomenon is, it seems to be in Mesopotamian culture, once you don't believe in a god anymore, you raise him to the next level. You compliment him a little bit up. It's like, sometimes in church politics, you don't want to have someone be a conference president, you just put him to another level, right? You say, like he's so high, but now we're praying actually to someone else, to Marduk or to Enlil, who is the mediator. Maybe you know that some of our Christian friends in another denomination actually have this picture of God that is so high that you have to pray to other ones to get to them, right? And so the interesting thing is, Anu, in later times, will never be worshipped by the Babylonians and Sumerians. They only know he is the creator God. He's the highest God. He created all the gods. And he's up there in heaven. But we don't really pray to him anymore. But at that early time, they still prayed to Anu. Only at the very end of the Old Testament period, there's a revival of the worship of Anu, the heaven God, the God of heaven. So I find this interesting. And then we find that from Uruk, very early, like this is like pre-flood. This is long before Abraham, right? So we're in the time between the flood and Abraham. This civilization spreads, and it spreads to the north, to what is later called Assyria, and to the east, because we find the very same archaeological record. So someone has called this system the Uruk world system, the first world empire. Now, sometimes people think, oh, maybe this was the only empire that didn't use violence. Maybe it was just a trading union. Yeah? No, it wasn't. As you can see on this rolled seal inscription, they were using violence. So now I'm curious, does anyone know where in the Bible is the only reference to the city of Erech?
Genesis 11.
Yes, almost 10. Cush begot whom? Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Echret, Akkad, and Calne in the land of Shinar. Shinar is, of course, southern Mesopotamia. And now here's the interesting thing. We know about Erech from the archaeological record. We don't know where Calne is. We don't even know which city it is. My personal guess would be Susa, but I don't know. Akkad has never been found. So we don't know where Akkad is. And Babel has been found, but you cannot go very deep because the groundwater is so high that you cannot go beyond the time of the patriarchs. So you cannot go to the time prior to the flood. So basically, of all these cities, we only know Erech from the archaeological excavation. And so the archaeologists would say, this is the kingdom of Uruk. And I would say from the Bible perspective, okay, that's the only city we got. If we got a chance to see Babel deep down, maybe we would see the same, and we wouldn't call it the kingdom of Uruk. Maybe it's, Uruk just one of the pillars of that kingdom of Nimrod. And so maybe, because we don't have any script so far, but maybe you're looking here at one of the successors of Nimrod, or even himself, right? I don't know, but that's definitely the first empire, and that would align with the Bible. And at the end of this empire, they invented writing. And so then you have the first scripts. This is first cuneiform writing, very archaic, very interesting. These are the first signs, very much like pictographic, a calf, a pig, a snake, a man. And then it got more abstract later. Here the first, and it's all just economy. I got 2 sheep, you will get 3 buffaloes. I need some more beer for my workers. It's kind of, this kind of receipts. So nothing literary or religious. And you see people are trying to learn how to write, how to make the signs. And I just like to have this little fun exercise. This is mathematics in the Uruk writing system. So this dark dot is 10, okay? And this little one here is 1. And so this one is another one because it's not as little as this. And if you combine, if you add all of that, and all of that, and all of that, this is the sum. Can anyone tell me what this is the sign. So this is 10, this is 1, this plus this equals this. The first who says me what is this will be the winner. Once again, this is 10, this is 1, this plus this equals this. Who's the first to figure out?
130?
Huh? No?
90.
No? Which is this? This? No? 10, 1, this plus this is this. So what is this sign?
50.
Almost. Yeah, I heard it. 60, yes, you know. 10, 20, 30, 40, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 90, 10, 20, 30, 60 to 90, right? I did this with grade 5 and 6 at my class. They were a bit faster than you. But no shame. It was in German, so maybe my English was not clear. So, and then they have, of course, these lexical lists, and these are all different names. And so most of this we cannot even decipher. We don't even know in many cases what it means. We don't even know, is it Sumerian or not? So I will not bother you with this, but this is like early writing. And they had a temple. Maybe if you're like interested, like what would worship service in the time of Nimrod look like? It would be something like this. This is the White Temple, reconstructed, of course, very interesting reconstructions made by Artifacts Berlin. So if you go into the temple, it looks like this. So that would be the feeling in an Uruk temple, the time of Nimrod or shortly afterwards, right? So kind of interesting, right? Anyway. Another place you might know much better is, of course, this place. Does anyone know which place is that? That is famous Babylon in the time of Nebuchadnezzar II, better known as Nabucodonosor. And here, of course, the famous art and the famous Ishtar Gate. You could visit this in the Pergamon Museum, but you cannot because it is closed until 2037 They closed it for 25 years. So because we were archaeologists, and we got an email, and it says, if you want to collect some text, do it shortly because we will then close it for 25 years. And then we got another email, and it says, yeah, you read right. Many people were like saying that was me a typo, right? No, it was not a typo. They're closing it for 25 years to do renovation. That's a German way of doing renovation. Very, very proper, right? And so actually, they have everything that's in the Pergamon Museum. They now had to keep somewhere else, and so that's actually quite secret. They didn't find real space. So I have a friend who actually had to look at a tablet, and then he was brought to this. He was guided to this private-owned place in a fabric, and then it's not very secure, but nobody knows where it is. So anyway. Not going further on this. So this is the city plan of Babylon, okay? So this is the east, and this is the newer part in the west. And this, of course, the river, as you know, it is the river Euphrates. This, of course, the Euphrates has several arms. This is the Arachtu arm. And here's the Ishtar Gate. So you're coming from procession here, and here then is the South Palace and the North Palace. So here would be Nebuchadnezzar, and here the streets. And we even know the name streets. So here are the name streets of Babylon, at least some of them. Names were called like, he will hear the one who seeks him. Well, there was a small street called Bow Down, proud one. Or the Broad Street, the Broadway of Babylon was called, may the arrogant not flourish. Which is interesting for a street in Babylon where arrogance was kind of, imagine you're Daniel and you're asked, like, where do you live? I actually live in, may the arrogant not flourish 30, Or this one, which god is like Marduk? Interesting, right? This question, who is like, you remember Michael? Who is like God? Which god is like Marduk? Or pray and he will hear you. Can you see that the Babylonians were very religious? Very religious. So this is what Daniel would have found. So Samaria, you've heard about Samaria. Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. Many Bible stories center around Samaria. And here, this is modern Samaria. It was excavated. And did you know, most people always focus on Jerusalem, right? We found massive architecture from the time of Ahab and Omri. You know, Omri actually bought that place and he built his capital there. And these are the palaces where Ahab went in. So you could imagine like somewhere there, Elijah went in and out for all the stories. And then we find a lot of ivory art in Samaria, which is interesting because the Bible says that Ahab even built an ivory house. And the ivory art is like, if you would not have known that this is from Israel, what country would you have related this to? Egypt, right? So you can see how the artists of Ahab would copy Egyptian art. Now, this is a famous god in the Bible. So you've ever wondered, like, what is Baal looking like? This is what they worshipped, okay? So the people actually had this little tiny things. It's much more tiny in the original, right? And this is Baal, as we would say. And another place that is famous is Lachish. You've heard about the story of Sennacherib. I could go on for hours just to speak about Sennacherib. It's my favorite. It's most of the interesting Assyrian kings. I wrote my master thesis on Sennacherib. He's a very interesting guy. He's a tech guy, very realistic, and I need to stop myself. But he's famous for besieging Jerusalem, right? And then an angel of the Lord cuts down 137,000 Assyrians. But he got the city of Lachish. Remember that story? It's very quickly mentioned in the Bible. So if you go today to Lachish, you can still find the ramp that the Assyrians were actually building. It's still there, 2,700 years. This is the ramp they were building, and then you can reconstruct the Judean. They built a counter ramp, and in order to prevent this, but they couldn't. We find the Assyrians' arrowheads, and we find they're not shooting with cannonballs, but they're shooting with balls, right? And so many of them have been found there. And then in Nineveh, which is modern-day Mosul, we find on this hill Kuyunjik, the big palace of Sennacherib. By the way, there are German expeditions right now from the University of Heidelberg that are going back to Nineveh, and we expect more writing to come from that. And in this southwest palace over here, which is the biggest palace built by any Assyrian king, so he called it Ekal La Shananu, the palace without any rival. This is more like 100 meters or so, like a very, very big thing. Here's the throne room, here are the courtyards, and then all these different rooms for him and his wives and everything else. And so this is Sennacherib, and here you have all the rooms excavated and then reconstructed. And so this massive building here, we're looking at this now because there, the central room, even here the library of Ashurbanipal is just in the side, but the central room where everything is going on is called the famous Lachish room, because in this room Sennacherib actually depicts this siege of the city of Lachish. And so it's kind of watching a movie, starting attacking the infantry and then the storming of Lachish, to spoil the captives. So you go from left to right and you see the entire siege, how he stormed that city. And here are some details, Assyrian archers shooting their arrows, and then these are not missiles in the modern sense, but you see some are trying to flee, and then they're using these rams, almost like tanks, right? They're these battering rams, trying to conquer the city, and then they're taking all the spoils, and you do not want to fall into the hands of an Assyrian. If you can avoid this, by the way, the Assyrians were actually not that good in fighting. They were more like ISIS. They were very good in psycho-terror. So they would openly, people think the Assyrians are more cruel than the other ones, which is not true. Babylonians are cruel, Egyptians, everyone is cruel. But the Assyrians figured out if we portray that we are cruel, then people don't even want to fight. So in many cases, when they approach the city and they would, make their demonstrations by having all these piles of hats, piled up and, flayed skin, pudding for everyone to see, then the people inside the city would just take their king, bring him out and say, leave us alone, right? And so many kings were just killed because the people betrayed them. Anyone under 18 here? Okay. So even if you're above 18, if you're tender-hearted, stop your ears just for half a minute, okay? Can you do that? So I don't want you to have nightmares, okay? So what they're doing here is they're laying them on the floor, and then they're taking off their skin while they're alive. But in order for them not to cry, they've cut out the tongues before. They cut off the tongues and then take off the skin. So don't be too critical of Jonah when he was called to go to Nineveh. He knew about this. This is like getting a call by God. You go alone by plane to Pyongyang, North Korea, right? Or like Saudi Arabia, just stand there and preach the gospel, right? And you're like, that's death sentence, right? So these are the Assyrians. This is a Sennacherib, a cuneiform inscription saying he's a king and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so maybe something else. The cities of the Philistines. You know the Philistines in the Bible, the enemies of the Israelites, Ashdod, Gath, Gaza, and so on. And this is Gath. So the city of Gath is modern Tel El Safi. And they found ostraca, which is, these little shirts. And on these ostraca, they found some names and which prove the Philistines were not Semitic. They were not Canaanites. They were not Arameans or Babylonians. They are most likely coming from the west, from the Mediterranean Sea. And does anyone know what the Bible says where the Philistines come from? Cyprus? Not from Cyprus. It says Kaftor, and Kaftor is Crete. So it's kind of Proto-Greek, basically, right? And so they found names like Alwat and Walat, which is not Semitic, but it sounds a little bit like Goliath. Yeah, Goliath and Alwat and Walat, that seems to be linguistically linked. So people say like Goliath is actually a name that would fit to the language and culture of Gath. And then 2010, they were found in a Philistine temple in Gath, 2 bases of pillars. Do you remember any story about pillars in a temple in the city of Gath? So I don't know whether these are these pillars, but maybe some of these sorts of pillars, Samson was standing, right? So that's just another little interesting thing. So some events. So we are now studying Exodus in our Sabbath school. And by the way, let me just. Oh, a little bit. Okay, very good. And so if you're interested, we can discuss all day about the Exodus and when and how and where they crossed the sea. Have you ever seen any? Let me just tell you something. Almost all the documentaries I have seen are wrong. Really. If you really study the Bible and you study Ellen White and you study the geography and you really go deep, it's very clear they never crossed the Gulf of Aqaba. They could not. And Mount Sinai is not in northwest South Arabia. It's on the Sinai Peninsula. And I can prove it to you if you want, but that's not my topic right now. So I just got you shocked maybe. But it's very clear, and I think I even found the place where they actually crossed the Gulf of Suez. I can convince you later on this. But I will show you some archaeological findings, because there's not much archaeological we find about the Exodus, of course. This is a famous tomb of an Egyptian vizier in the south of Egypt from the 18th dynasty, which would be the dynasty of the Exodus. And it shows Semitic slaves doing slave work, right? And by the way, there's always been a debate, was the Exodus in the, maybe you know, there's the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom, if you know a little bit about Egypt, right? And nowadays some people say maybe it was in the Middle Kingdom. But in the Middle Kingdom, slaves were not used for like workforces. They were used in the household. So Joseph really fits into the Middle Kingdom, but the Exodus fits into the New Kingdom. And there are some more evidences for that, but I can't go into this. So there, from a later time, we even have like a leather roll by Ramses II, who shows how many bricks such a group of workers has to produce every day. So there's a quota of 2,000 bricks per overseer, and then if you cannot, produce this, like he's get beaten, and everyone else is, like we see from the Bible. In Exodus 1:16, it says, if you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew woman and see them on the birth stool, like some versions I even just say, like, look when they give birth, right? But the Hebrew is very clear. They have like stones. And people have wondered, like, how do they have stones? Now, it is actually the case that in Egypt, they used birth bricks. So a woman in labor would sit on bricks. And these were called like magical, like at least in Egypt, thought it was magical. And 2001, we found the first archaeological evidence for such a brick. It has an inscription. And so the woman would sit on the bricks. And so this is why the Bible says, if you give birth to a son and you look to the bricks, you find out it's a son or it's a girl. And we know from Egypt documents that midwifery was religiously significant because you're giving life, so to speak. And that's why midwives had a much higher social prestige than nowadays. That's why it is not anachronistic or strange that they would be called by the king. Nowadays we think like, why would the king call to midwives, right? But back then they had a high status in society. So this is much more realistic from that perspective. By the way, when the Bible says, God repeatedly said, I'm bringing you out with an outstretched arm and with a strong hand, this is actually referring to an Egypt idiom. The Pharaoh was also called the Lord of the strong arm. And so the idea is not, I have a strong arm, I can get you out. It's the strong arm that pushes and that batters and that kills the enemy, so to speak, the Neb Chofesh. So here we have an Amarna letter where it says, someone who got installed by the Pharaoh, the strong arm of the king installed me in the house of my father. But here's the most exciting thing. Oh, no, wait. So, they built the city of, 15 minutes remaining. So I'm sorry for speaking too slow so far. I will remedy that. They were building Ramses. You've heard about that? And the Bible critics would say, yes, but this is evidence that the Exodus could never have been in the 15th century, like the Bible chronology would indicate, because Ramses was only built by pharaohs called Ramses, right? And that was later. So they would say, if the Exodus happened, it was in the 13th century or so, 12th century. Now, what people have overlooked is that the same city we later was called Ramses was, of course, there before. It was called Avaris, which was the capital of the Hyksos. And then in the 18th century, it was called Perunefe. And you may know that in the Bible, over time, names of places got changed. You remember, like Abraham is chasing his enemies to the city of Dan. But when Abraham lived, there was no city of Dan, because Dan was later named after his grandson, Dan, right? So this name was something else, and then, later Bible writer would say, nobody knows its name anymore. Everyone knows it's Dan, so they would just put Dan. Like, we would not call New York New Amsterdam today, but it was originally called New Amsterdam. So this is Avaris, Perunefe, and there we find palaces. And so it could well be that this kind of was the palace where Moses and Aaron actually went into. Now we know in the 18th century, at the time of the Exodus, there was a palace and it looked like this. And we even know what the painting on the wall was. And here you have like the different layers, and for that time there is what the Germans say, Palastbezirk. We know the painting on the wall, and it looked like this. Not Egyptian at all, because the Egyptians were so powerful. They had so many contacts to even to the Greek world. They had some more Minoan, so pre-Greek paintings. So imagine Moses, not in the films, like everything just, Egyptianized. Maybe it was a bit more international, and maybe some Minoans from Crete or from Greece were actually standing there and listening to what's happening. I don't know. So, but here's the thing I really want to show you. So if anything else was boring, this hopefully will get your attention. Okay? Ramses II, this is after the Exodus, of course. Okay? This is like 200 years after the Exodus. He fights a battle against the Hittites, which is most likely not the Hittites of the Bible, that's another topic. And it's a famous battle of Kadesh. Everyone who has ever watched like YouTube on the Egyptians will find this one, right? But what most people have never seen or like heard is there are, of course, these depictions on the walls and everything. And there's the depiction of the war tent of Ramses. So prior to the battle, he's pitching the night before his war tent. Now listen to this. This war tent is rectangular with 2 compartments. How many compartments? The outer chamber is twice as long as the inner one. And the inner chamber is for the king. In the inner chamber, divine falcons face each other and covering the king's name with their wings. Does it sound familiar? A rectangular courtyard made of palisades surrounds the tent. In later times, the courtyard of armies would be encircled, but it's rectangular. And then even, there are 4 divisions of the Egyptian army, and they're like one division there, one there, one there, one there. Does it remind you of anything in the Bible? This is like the Israelite camp at Sinai. So now you can ask the question, and I don't have the answer. Is Ramses copying God, or is even God saying through this, I'm the true Pharaoh? Because this might be the original way how Egyptians actually went to war. They have the army, in 4 divisions, and then they have the tent in the middle, and the king in the inner chamber and then they have these divine falcons covering the name. Even then you see the cartouche with the name, and it's covered by the falcon's wings. And like wherever God has his Ark of the Covenant, he says, I will put down my name, right? So very interesting comparison. So, this again is Nebuchadnezzar. That's a famous Babylonian Chronicle number 5. You find it in the British Museum if you turn it around. There are 3 lines which are very interesting because they, I can just read it to you. It says, in the 7th year, in the month of Kishlimu, which is, November, December 598 BC, the king of Akkad, which is the king of Babylon, mustered his troops and marched to Hattiland. And Hattiland for the Babylonians, everything that is west is Hattiland, because once in a time the Hittites were living there. So whether it's Israel or Syria, it's all Hattiland, right? So Hattiland. And he besieged the city of Judah, which is, of course, the city Jerusalem. And on the 2nd day of the month Adaru, he took the city. So this is the 2nd sack of Jerusalem, so to speak, where Ezekiel and the others were taken. And because of the Babylonian Chronicle, we can date it to the day. We can say Jerusalem was sacked on the 16th of March in 597. So in any case, if you want to like commemorate this on a yearly basis, you can say the 2nd sack of Jerusalem. And then it says that he appointed a king of his own choosing, received their heavy tribute and sent it to Babylon. And this, of course, what the Bible says, that the king was taken to Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar then appointed a new king, which he called Zedekiah. You've heard about this one? I'm just having a few more. This is the famous Cyrus cylinder in the British Museum. In my studies, we read the entire thing. So if you read it, you're not going to the British Museum, you're using this. So you can see the entire cylinder just, flattened out. And as you see, it's a little bit broken, of course, like everything in this realm of study. It's very interesting because Cyrus says, Anaku Kurosh Sharkishat, and so on. I'm Cyrus, king of the world, the great king, blah, 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 the strong king, the king of Babel, king of Sumer, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, when referring to the conquering of Babylon, says, you can read here very clearly, Balu Kabli U Tahassi, which means he conquered the city without battle or combat. Remember the story? How did Cyrus conquer the city?
The gods were drunk. The gods were drunk.
Yeah,
He diverted the river.
he diverted the river way up in the north. There was a basin where, overflow water would go, and then he would, he would divert this, and then he would surprise the Babylonians who were just partying inside Babylon, Daniel 5 and Isaiah 21. So we have 5 minutes left, so we're just doing this little thing here. Enuma Elish is one of the famous texts about the great controversy seen from Babylonian sites. It's it speaks about the beginning, how everything came out of water, right? So we're not going to read everything, how all the different gods were formed. But the idea here is that as the different pairs of gods are formed, there is a battle of the gods. The younger gods think heaven is a little bit boring, and they start making parties, right? And roaring and having tumult. And the older gods actually, now listen, they feel that their rest is disturbed. And because their rest is disturbed, they actually think we should get rid of the younger gods and kill them. But in the Babylonian story, the younger ones are very smart, and they realize this, and they kill the older ones. And by the way, is there not something like a sabbatismus, a rest in heaven, that might be very important to the great controversy? So, I'm just skipping all of this, but I want to show you this. On tablet 6, then, man is created. How is man created in the Babylonian worldview? It says, when Marduk, this is the hero, one of the younger ones, right? When Marduk heard the God's speech, he conceived the desire to accomplish clever things. He opened his mouth, addressing Ea. He counseled that which he had pondered in his heart. I will bring together blood and form bone. I will bring into being Lulu, whose name shall be man. I will create Lulu, man, which is very interesting because it's a wordplay, because in Babylonian, man is Awilu. On whom the toil of the gods will be laid that they may rest, right? So the gods can then be just happy, and the man shall work for the gods. I will skillfully alter the organization of the gods, blah, 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 blah. And then he says, verse 13, let one brother of theirs be given up, that he may perish and people may be fashioned. So the idea is now, in order to make man, we need to sacrifice one God. And we sacrifice one God, and from his blood and from clay, we form man. Isn't that interesting? If you know the great controversy, if you know the gospel, you see a lot of motives, but all mingled together and twisted, right? And then it says, let the great gods assemble and let the guilty one be given up that they may be confirmed. And then they ask, okay, who made Tiamat rebel? Who is the one who instigated warfare? Who made Tiamat rebel and set battle in motion? So the question is, who is responsible for the battle in heaven? And so I told you the story. The younger ones wanted to party, and the older ones wanted to get rid of the younger ones, right? And so in the Babylonian view now, the older ones are responsible for the rebellion because they wanted to kill the younger ones. And they say one guy especially, his name is Kingu, he is responsible for starting the rebellion and let him be killed. And so they kill this one god. Here they say Kingu is the one who instigated warfare and set battle in motion. And then it says they inflicted the penalty on him and severed his blood vessels. From his blood Ea created mankind, on whom he imposed the service of the gods. Now if you know the great controversy about a battle, right? You see how they totally twisted it. But it's not a new story, it's just a twisted story, right? Interesting. And we're closing with this one. I'm always fascinated with, comparing the Bible stories with what other cultures actually thought about the same topic. Now this is my favorite. This is from Ugarit. This is a little bit north of Israel. This would be the time of the judges, okay? And in Ugaritic we have this cuneiform alphabet. So it's an alphabet but using cuneiform signs. And they have a lot of gods. You may, most of them know from the Bible. They have Baal, and they have Athiratu, which is Asherah, and Athtartu, which is Astarte. And they have their main god, which is Elohim, right? And it's the same with Anu. El is the weak old god, like, the grandfather of the gods, who's a little bit, not on, a little bit old right now. But the strong one is Baal, right? He is the one, energetic, and he's a hero. But El is kind of, the godfather of everything. And so here's the story of the great controversy in, first of all, Ilu and Athiratu create through their words. Right? They create through their words. But sometimes they also create through sexual intercourse, so there are different things. And then they believed that the main God in heaven, he resides in a tent, right? In a tent and at the sources of Euphrates and Tigris. So you remember maybe the Old Testament, the Garden of Eden is described, with the Euphrates and Tigris, and so on. Now let's read this. One statement which I found very interesting. Listen to this. A scientist said, according to all major religions of the ancient East, the religion of Israel accepted. Now think about this. The first rebellion against the Creator took place not among human beings, but in the world of deities. So he's saying, when we look at all the different cultures, the battle is always in heaven. And then he thinks, only in the Bible it's not the case. Why does he think so? Because you read the Bible, you have Genesis 1, 2, 3, and it seems that the rebellion just is on earth, right? But he doesn't know the Adventist message, right? We know it's also in heaven, but it's also interesting that the Bible kind of has it a little bit more hidden, if I may speak so, right? It's more like on God, and Satan is a little bit more in the background. So that he even thinks like the Hebrew Bible is the only one that doesn't know about a great controversy in heaven. So anyway, so here, now listen. Very carefully. The great controversy in Ugarit. The rebel is the god Horon, who rebels against Ilu, the main god, and is thrown from the snow-capped mountain. So he's thrown down the mountain. There's a tree of life. He attempts to make the tree of life inaccessible to the gods by placing himself in the tree as a serpent. You know that story? This serpent is a monster like the biblical Leviathan. And his poison transforms the tree of life into a tree of death. The entire world withers. Now the gods think we have to do something. So they send a god down from heaven to earth, which name is Adamu. Have you heard of Adamu? you see, like the idea of God coming down to earth and Adam is being tricked. You see, it's twisted, right? But it's all there. He is given authority over the entire earth, but is then bitten by the snake and begins to die. The sun goddess takes pity on Adamu and calls on the other gods to summon the snake before it is too late. Horon uproots the tree of death and purifies it to protect his descendants, the snakes. So the rebel now makes a turn and he goes back. He comes back and he is actually rewarded. He becomes the official executioner of other rebels. So he's brought back, right? And now the last thing. When this rebel, Horon, is seen in the sky, his name is Hilal. Does anyone know what the Hebrew name for Lucifer actually is? Hillel. Hillel, that is the name of Lucifer in Isaiah 14. So there's a lot of parallel. And then there's Adamu's wife, which is, the mother of all, and so on and so forth. So, time is up, I think, right? So, there will be more, but I'm sorry. What I'm trying to say to you is, first of all, many places in the Bible, many events in the Bible, many persons in the Bible are all substantiated by extra biblical evidence. And we can even see that the theological themes of the Bible were present outside, but not truly, but twisted. But you can see how Satan was twisting the truth that was presented to make it a little bit different. And you can also see that it was so close that people in Israel were not, it was not a far step to go to the heathens, right? So they would say, hey, they have the same God El as we have, right? And they have similar stories, but it's a little bit different. And so it was not like a wide jump for them to go into heathenism. And this may be an interesting lesson for us today. So I know there was much. Is there any immediate question, anything that just comes to mind quickly? Yes.
I mean, yeah, absolutely amazing presentation, but I wonder, as you read through these things, I mean, I have to believe that what you're saying could also be a shopping list.
No, it's not.
Yeah, but how's the first step? Is it probably you didn't wake up one day and you just were able to read these things?
No.
How's that? Like you just probably learned their language?
Yes, I studied archaeology. So I learned Akkadian, I learned Sumerian.
But what was the first step? Someone has to say, okay, this one probably means like that.
You mean deciphering? If you like, I mean, oh, that's a very good question. So the story how cuneiform was deciphered is time. But they figured out, which signs look the same, and then they figured out, okay, these signs are occurring at the same place, and then they figured, okay, these must be names. In Egyptian, they would then find that the cartouche have the pharaoh names, and in Old Persian, they would say, okay, this is one link of sign, and then it's another set of signs twice, so this is king and king of kings, and they would know the names, and they would, by trial and error. And once you got some basic ideas, it's very easy because Akkadian is very similar to Hebrew. But once you know it's Semitic, you can reconstruct from Arabic and Aramaic, and but there are still some languages where we are not quite sure. So if you study Sumerian, like in your first semester, you learn like we know this and this and this, and we don't know what this is, right? So Akkadian is already like we have now almost 200 years of Akkadian. So we are very sure about almost all the words. Sometimes it's a case of it's the vocal long or short, the different grammatical opinions. But there's a lot of effort to decipher this. But that was a very incomplete answer to a very good question. But it takes more time to explain how you do this. But there are actually languages that are deciphered even today. Like 2 years ago, they finally deciphered Linear Elamite, which is a precursor to Elamite, which was not deciphered so far, and they were able to actually. Often it is when you have a document and which is in 2 languages and you know one language, then it's very easy. Like not easy, but it's doable in a Rosetta Stone, and they did this now with Linear Elamite, for example. Or now we had 2 years ago we found tablets with Babylonian, Akkadian, and Amorite. So we now know what Amorite looks like. It's very similar, but it's different. Because we can read the Babylonian already, we can then also reconstruct the Amorite. And we now know how Amorites were talking on a day basis. Yeah. So and then of course, there are so many texts you cannot make, like at the level we are now, it's sure that these are the readings.